So welcome to the 22 ICPN Annual Conference. This is session 3, and I am here with the two presenters, Tyler and Matt. We asked both of our presenters to send us a few of their favorite memes. I don't know about you guys, but we like to interact via memes. So sometimes we have full conversations with just memes all day long. So here they are, and let's see how funny these are. Therapist, and how does that make you feel? I am not very good at describing my emotions. Maybe you could just hold up a bunch of meme pictures until I see one that I would normally comment the word mood on. What a therapist you are. All right, let's see what else we got. Okay, so we have an Schitt's Creek fan in here. I know I love it, so I already like this one. When your therapist ignores your decoy issues and starts to shed light on the real issue. You're pretty quiet over there. Are you not proud of these memes? The therapy dog after I share all my problems. We need to talk about this, Matt. So here's our other presenter, Tyler. Let's see who has better memes, Tyler or Matt.
I didn't realize it was a contest.
It is a contest. Everything's a contest, right?
All right.
Math textbooks will put a guy skateboarding on the cover to make it seem cool, but we all know that math is for nerds. Why did that one speak to you?
Because I'm not good at math.
You're not good, so you're not a nerd?
No, I'm not a nerd.
Oh, yeah, I'm not good at math either.
We're all in psychology because we can't do math.
That's right. How many of us started in psychology in college just because we thought it was cool and we took a test in career class and it said you like to help people, and then you graduate with your bachelor's degree and you're like, now what am I going to do with this? As per my last email.
I feel like everybody here can probably relate to this to one degree or another.
No comment needed?
No comments.
Anxious people spent the day mentally preparing for a specific scenario to happen. And here's the scenario.
Yep, that guy, that's the day that guy's been waiting for.
Are you an anxious person?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course.
And he's presenting today, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, memes from Team Rockford. So I'm part of the Rockford team. Amy's part of the Rockford team. So sorry, Team Rockford, but you don't know this is happening, but here it comes. When you sneeze so hard, your mustache changes lips. Who doesn't like a good mustache meme, right? Me, pulls up worn out socks, my toe, bonjour. Cute. When Snapchat is down, so you got to take a picture with no filter. Do young people even know who Goonies are? Does everyone know that one? Laughing at everyone panic buying gas. Well, I hope I run out so I don't have to go to work. Team Rockford, come on. When you're at work trying to stay positive. First day of Zoom meetings, 14th day of Zoom meetings. All right. Me after eat all my quarantine snacks in one night. All right, so we showed this last week and we wanted to just show it again. So these are the agencies in attendance today. If we missed you, we apologize. We didn't mean to. But just kind of the purpose is just to show that we are all in this together. We're all, trying to get continuing education, but we also are trying to learn about new topics, about the supports that we can do in this field and just create more therapeutic environments for people that we are serving. So we all have a lot in common. Amy and I were talking a little bit on the way home after the last session. In our first session, what the commonality was, we talked a lot about grief, was the need for connection with people. Like people going through grief, through the pandemic, we need those connections. Our second session, we pivoted to a very different topic about behaviors that challenge our system. And Dr. Buckles talked again about the connection with people, regardless if they have challenging behaviors or not, reframing how we're thinking of things. But the overlying theme was, again, connection. So I'm thinking today that might be another theme. I haven't seen both their presentations yet, but I'm challenging you guys to kind of think about what they're presenting and to keep in the back of your head is connection, overlying theme of their presentation as well. So Matt is up first.
I'm Matt Meyer. I'm the director of the Hillside office, ICPN. Been in the field since about 2006, started as a DSP, I've kind of done a little bit of everything. Today, I'm going to talk about functional analytic psychotherapy. There's one factor in human life that really predicts a lot of mental and physical ailments. And that factor is the presence or absence of social connection. We know social connection is so fundamental to human life that isolation is actually used as a punishment, even within prison systems where people are already being punished. It's so aversive to who we are. So as we're going through this, I want you to think about our clients and the social connections that they have or do not have, and sort of the role we play in their lives, often as the primary, if not only, social connection. So what we know about the impact of poor relationships or the absence of social connection is that there's a 26% increased risk of mortality, which is more than drinking, chronic exposure to air pollution, and double the impact of obesity. There's also a 50% increase in the chance of dementia, 29% increase in heart rate, in heart disease, and 32% increase in stroke. So this doesn't just impact our psychological well-being, it impacts our physical well-being. And we know this is so because human beings evolved to function in small groups, right? We were never the fastest, we were never the strongest. What we had as an evolutionary advantage was the fact that we were able to bond with other people and survive together. So it's no wonder that when we fall outside of a group, that actually feels like death, because it once was, still is. So taking all that into account, what we know about mental health is that it must be addressed within a social context. We can't take an individual and work on mental health without addressing all of these other factors in their lives. What we know about social connection and the absence of social connection is that it functions sort of in a two-way direction. So lack of social connection can lead to mental health issues. Mental health issues can also contribute to social isolation. So there's a kind of a back and forth interplay between the two. So people have come to therapy from the beginning of the field to sort of work on their personal issues as well as their interpersonal issues. And there's been a number of different sort of schools of thought that have tried to help people address these issues. So I know we have a lot of people in here from various sort of clinical backgrounds. We've got BCBAs, we've got counselors, we've got psychologists, we've got Qs. So I'm going to run through just really quickly the foundational sort of principles of our field that have contributed to functional analytic psychotherapy, which is what we're going to talk about as the primary therapy today. So when most people think of psychology or psychiatry, they originally think of what Sigmund Freud, right? The person laying on the couch, Sigmund Freud as the expert, sort of assessing the internal world, the unconscious, subconscious internal world of the patient laying on the couch, right? This was a style of therapy that was called classical psychodynamic, which his belief was that neuroses came from unconscious drives and desires in the individual. He really, the focus was working with the individual, with the clinician as expert. But Karen Horney, who was a sort of a student of his, and she was a founder of feminist psychodynamic theory, and she kind of took that principle and decided that interpersonal interactions can also provide insight into the causes and cures of most psychological distress. So she sort of introduced the more interpersonal factor that most therapy has since run with. And she also gave us the idea that there's no such thing as normal, and we all have neuroses. So thank her for that, because we all do. All right, now we get to one of my personal favorites from the humanistic side of therapy. So this is Dr. Carl Rogers. So he kind of went a step beyond where Karen Horney was as far as the importance of the interpersonal relationship in the therapy room. So he actually got to the point where he believed that the therapy relationship itself was the healing component of therapy. So his sort of foundational belief is that human beings are on a natural trajectory towards self-actualization, which is sort of becoming the best version of themselves interpersonally in their life. And the therapist's role is basically to create the conditions in the room through the relationship where that person can do that and thrive and grow. And you do this through creating a therapeutic relationship that has these, what they're called core conditions for therapy. So accurate empathy, truly understanding the person that's in the room with you from their perspective. Congruence, so actually a balance between how you're feeling internally and how you're presenting to the world. And unconditional positive regard, so you're always on the side of your client's best interests. So again, I'm talking about these theories because functional analytic psychotherapy takes a lot of these and sort of meshes them together in a way that is kind of unexpected. Right. Then we get to behaviorism. I know we have a lot of BCBAs in the room, so please forgive me for not accurately representing your field. It's not mine, not my sort of foundational practice. So we have here Dr. Skinner. So his sort of idea of humans and their suffering is that the mind is not, if there's an internal world, we can't really access it. It's a black box. So it's really not of interest when it comes to working with people. So as opposed to sort of Dr. Freud, who thought that people were driven by an internal drive that was basically not part of their free will, Dr. Skinner also doesn't believe in free will, but the pressures are coming from outside of the person to sort of drive their behavior. And this is through a process called operant conditioning, reinforcement, punishment. And then the idea of radical behaviorism. So the idea that anything a living creature can do is behavior, including our thinking. So it's not that he's not interested in it. It's just that if you can't observe it, then it's not behaviorism. So some ABA techniques that we're all very familiar with. So looking for antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, right? We're looking for what comes before a behavior, what comes after a behavior.
We're just getting feedback that can you switch your mic to the other side.
Nope. Sure. Sorry about that. You guys hear me now? And then some common ABA techniques are chaining, prompting, and shaping. So basically, this is all just processes for building sort of series of behavior that help the person function at a higher level. This takes us to cognitive behavioral therapy. Dr. Aaron Beck and his daughter, who has taken up the mantle. So basically, this style of therapy says that you can access thoughts and beliefs and challenge them in order to sort of change the whole way of interacting with the world and with other people. So sort of the filters that we see other people through our own beliefs, maybe I will be rejected, people are judging me. If you can access those thoughts and challenge them, it will actually improve your interpersonal relationships with other people. And as you can see here, in this style of therapy, you can sort of come in at any of these points and challenge. You can challenge your thoughts. You can challenge your core beliefs about yourself, the world, others, all of these things that interplay with how we interact with other people. Then this brings us to what's called the third wave. So this school of therapy, you're starting to get into what's called metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. You're noticing your thoughts without necessarily having to change them. The focus of therapy shifts sort of from trying to change feelings to being able to accept those feelings and act in a way that's going to create a meaningful life, meaningful relationships. And we do this through a number of techniques that are going to be covered heavily in the second hour of the presentation when we talk about ACT therapy. And then there's dialectical behavioral therapy. Dr. Marsha Linehan, she discovered that there was a lot of clients who weren't responding to a lot of traditional therapy. A lot of clients who had borderline personality disorder and suicidal ideation. we're often not doing well with traditional therapy. So what she kind of figured out was that this idea of dialectics, where you have to be able to hold two ideas at the same time when you're working with clients, that you need to be able to accept them 100% for who they are and also help them recognize the need to change. And that's called dialectics. When you're able to do that, you're going to create a less invalidating environment that they are less likely to respond to. Okay, so that brings us to what we're actually here to talk about today. So functional analytic psychotherapy. So what is this therapy? So the idea behind this therapy is that improving interpersonal relationships as a means to achieving healthy and fulfilling lives. It's grounded in contextual behavioral sciences with an emphasis on the client-therapist relationship. So you can see it meshes together the behaviorism school and the sort of humanistic school into a sort of cohesive therapy. So the mechanism of change in this therapy is the therapist contingent responding in the therapy room to decrease less adaptive behaviors while increasing more adaptive behaviors. So that's language that I think most of our BCBAs will recognize. Here's where it kind of moves away from that more behavioral idea. So you'll see here, the core, really the heart of this therapy are these three ideas here: awareness, courage, and love. And these are not necessarily words we're going to hear often in strictly behavioral therapy. So the principle is that each time you interact with someone, you have the opportunity to reflect what is special and precious about this person, to heal a wound, to create closeness, possibilities, and magic. And that's a quote from the founder, Dr. Mavis Tsai. So what is that magic she's talking about? It's the idea that you can create more meaningful relationships through a formula of courage, awareness, and love. So what does that mean when we're defining our terms? Courage is the courage to be vulnerable, to open yourself up to another person, to try something new. Awareness is recognizing when somebody else is demonstrating that courage. And love is accepting with warmth and openness and compassion that person's attempt at courage. So what are we really doing in this therapy? We're trying to help a person change behavioral patterns in their relationships to form deeper and more meaningful connections. And we're looking for function over form of behaviors. We don't want to get so stuck on one behavior that we fail to see the constellation of behaviors. If we can sort of determine the function of one behavior and how it applies to many behaviors across a person's life, you can affect change on a grander scale. So let's talk more about awareness, courage, and love. So awareness, the idea is being awake and alive to the present moment, to yourself, the other person, and the dynamic happening between the two of you in the room. It's the ability to notice another's act of courage in order to respond to that courage with love. And it's helping clients grow their own awareness with you as well in the therapy room. Courage. Courage is moving towards authentic connection in spite of aversion or fear. Every act of courage requires some potential for vulnerability, for being rejected. So anytime somebody's opening themselves up in that way, it's a courageous act, and it's our job to recognize it. So it can involve self-disclosure or asking for a need to be met. It can be a person asking for closeness, for boundaries, for support, for feedback, or to simply be understood by another person. And love is primarily about how we respond when others act with courage in our presence. First, you have to have awareness and recognize it. and then you act with love to reinforce it. We can do this through providing them safety, making sure that when they open up to us, we are accepting them warmly. We're not creating conditions where they're going to learn that closing themselves off was actually the safest thing to do. We are going to express understanding, validation, empathy. So some of the ways we can demonstrate love by giving what is needed. So providing closeness, respecting boundaries or staying open to feedback, apologizing, promising, expressing appreciation, and reciprocal disclosure. So in this therapy, we as staff are not hiding behind a sort of professional veneer where we are a black box to our clients with no inner world and no personal life. We are opening ourselves up. We're also asking ourselves to demonstrate courage by being vulnerable. So when we're looking at interpersonal behaviors in this style of therapy, we're recognizing that all of these behaviors have a context to them, a place where they once made sense in the person's life, right? Maybe a person was bullied in high school when they would open up and reveal something about themselves, right? There's always a reason why people behave the way they do. Our job is to sort of help them look for these things that are no longer serving the interests that they once did. And then we're using natural reinforcement. So we're responding with love to the client within the relationship when they show courage or try a new behavior, something more functional in their life. They're taking a chance with a relationship. And then we're helping the clients, once they've sort of figured those things out, we're helping them generalize it to the world, right? So what happens outside of the therapy session? We want to bring awareness to new behaviors that they have with us in the room, and then help them see how they can try that new behavior in the world. So an example of this after an interaction in a room might be, I notice I feel closer to you when you sustain eye contact with me. I wonder if that might be true of others as well. And then functional analysis. So functional analysis keeps us on track with what we're doing in therapy. So how was this behavior learned or shaped? What function did the behavior once serve? How does it function now? And what are the current downsides of this behavior? How is it impacting the quality of the relationships, true intimacy? And we do all of this through looking for what we call clinically relevant behaviors in the therapy room. So these are defined as certain conduct, behaviors, styles of interpersonal engagement, which may serve the same function inside and outside of the therapy room. So we're looking for patterns in life playing out in the here and now relationship. So CRB1. So this is behaviors that likely served a function for the client at one time, but now are contributing to a lack of authentic connection in their social relationships. So this is kind of the starting point. You notice that this client becomes defensive in the therapy room with you, right? So you start to wonder, is that something that they're doing outside of the room that's causing their relationships to suffer? And then you're not just noticing and documenting and working on this, you're bringing this to the client's attention and working on it with them. And then CRB2 is any incremental improvement from the CRB1. Anything that's going to better solidify their relationships in a way that are more open, authentic, and real. So an example of this might be the client that was previously acting out with defensiveness in the therapy room. This time tells you that they're feeling upset about a question you asked them. They tell you. That would be an improvement. And now that's a CRB1 to the initial CRB2 behavior. All right, so do a pop quiz. So a staff is meeting with her client. During the meeting, the staff asks the client to help her with a task. The client screams no at the staff and leaves the room. Is this a CRB1 or a CRB2 behavior? We have any guesses? A 1? We got a 1. Unfortunately, it's a trick question. So it depends, right? Always depends on our starting point. So let's say this client in the past was one of our compliant clients who just never said no to anything. A person on the street asks them to do something, they're going to do it. No questions asked. So this client taking a stand is actually movement in the direction of a more socially appropriate interpersonal behavior, drawing a boundary. Is it the end point we want to end up at? No. But again, we're using these behavioral principles of helping them shape their behaviors to something more functional incrementally. So a way you might respond to that sort of dynamic as they're starting to slowly incrementally improve, but they're still not in a place that's going to be long-term good for them. You might say something like, I noticed you taking a stand and I support your setting boundaries. And I notice you erring on the side of bluntness or even harshness. Have you noticed that too? Like you're bringing it to their attention that like, yeah, it's really great, this thing. And there's also some other room to maybe change it up a little bit and make it even more functional for you. Right? So you can see here the sort of progression from CRB1 to CRB2, right? And now once you get to CRB2, you don't stop there. That becomes your new CRB1, the new thing you're working on. So the client shouts no and leaves when he doesn't want to do something or doesn't agree with something. The new CRB2, when you notice it, is that the client says no with a slightly elevated tone and stays in the room. Okay, now you're going to jump on this. That's great. That's a great change in behavior. You're taking your stand and you're able to sit with me. Awesome. And that will then become your new CRB1, on and on. All right. So when working with functional analytic psychotherapy, you're always operating within these 5 rules. So you're watching for these CRBs. So Carl Rogers once said, you want to notice with accurate empathy which behaviors serve a client, represent growth, flexibility, and which behaviors represent the client being stuck. And that's basically what we're doing still. We're using our awareness to distinguish between CRB1s and CRB2s, and we're helping the client also recognize them. The next stage is we're going to evoke these CRBs, right? So if the client is struggling with being assertive, we're going to give them opportunities to be assertive. So invite them to start the sessions with a statement of their needs. If a client fears intimacy, we're going to courageously encourage the client to ask us personal questions. Now that also requires us to have a level of courage to be vulnerable, right? If a client has difficulty accepting love, ask them to notice your warm expression as you enter the room. If a client asks for help being more responsive to the emotional needs of others, spend a few moments sharing a personal story of loss while providing the client opportunity for them to respond. How often do our clients get the opportunity to show empathy to us? They don't often know us on a deeper level than our professional veneer. All right. And then when you notice these CRB2s using your awareness in the therapy room, you're going to naturally reinforce them. So you're going to respond in a way that is socially natural, but maybe slightly more intense than you normally would be. So like, oh, that's amazing. You know, you're going to take it just a notch up than you normally would, but you don't want it to be phony. We know all of our clients will smell phony. You want it to be authentic. And emphasize safety and acceptance, speak with conviction, and vary it up. Learn what works for your client. You have to know what's going to be reinforcing for them. Everybody's different. And then you need to notice your own impact. So again, changes typically don't show up immediately and all at once. We need to kind of perpetually be taking stock of our progress over time and our clients' growth. We're looking for cycles, patterns, new ways of being that are improving their relationships. We'll talk with client about how things are evolving in your relationship with them. Discuss the effects upon one another. Again, this is a back and forth relationship. It's not we're the expert, they're the patient. It's a relationship. Acknowledge any changes. Always be assessing when your own issues or limitations may be coming into play too. So when I'm determining if this client is having a problematic social behavior, is that actually their thing or is that something coming up for me? So always being aware of that as well. And then supporting generalizations. So this is only useful if we can help them sort of take it from the therapy room out into the world, right? And actually develop relationships. So functional analysis and case formulation is done with the client. It's not something we're doing to the client. It's something we're doing with them. We help the client become aware of the parallels between, again, the CRBs in the room and in the world. And we collaborate with the client in the functional analysis process. So we also want to help them schedule activities where they can then test these new social behaviors in the world. And then discuss with the client how they're applying what they've learned, what their results were, help them sort of retailer any interactions that maybe didn't go as they had hoped. And one of the ways you might support generalizations, you might say something like, I felt closer to you in our sessions when you have let your guard down and really shared your feelings with me. And I wonder if like your friends would appreciate that as well, if that would also help you feel closer to them and them closer to you. You're helping them see the connection between your relationship with them and others' relationship with them. All right, so some common techniques. So you're helping them notice some of these common CRBs within the awareness, courage, and love sort of categories. So you're helping them recognize when they're not noticing details in conversations, when they're not noticing the impact of their own behaviors upon others, upon how others are responding to them, when they're not able to sort of identify and describe their own emotions, if they're being overly focused on protocol or professionalism, and that goes both ways, right? We can fall into that pattern of protecting ourselves and not being courageous by hiding behind a professional veneer. And then courage, so withholding vulnerable details, suppressing or avoiding emotion, presenting overly positive details. We all know those clients where everything's sunny but we know it's not really, and they're just not opening up to us. Overly assertive or overly guarded. Love, seldom providing feedback, being uncomfortable with warmth or validation, providing feedback in an inauthentic way. All right, so awareness and opportunities to address these CRBs are going to come up in a couple different ways within the therapy context. So they may be pure or contextual. So pure are going to be the sort of spontaneous interactions that happen in therapy where you're like, there's a CRB1. This is the client reacting in that way that causes them problems in the world. And then there's going to be contextual. So things that are going to come up just through the nature of the relationship that you can sort of use to evoke CRBs. So maybe it could be their favorite staff is going to go on vacation. It could be long silences in your conversation with them. It could be, maybe they had a home visit canceled, right? There's all kinds of things that can be used as an opportunity to evoke new behaviors, new ways of interpersonally interacting. The therapeutic stance in functional analytic psychotherapy is there's self-disclosure by the therapist. You're opening yourself up and being vulnerable as well. It's collaborative, it's accepting and validating, and it's reinforcing directness and courage at every opportunity. So T1s and T2s. So we're not just sort of assessing where our clients are starting and where their improvements are. T1s and T2s are us assessing our own progress. So maybe in therapy last week, I recognized there was an opportunity to address a CRB1, but I was worried that I was going to set the client off and maybe it was going to be a rough afternoon and I didn't do it, right? So my T2 would be next week with courage and love, challenging that client in a way that might help them grow. And that's going to help them also recognize or model my own courage for them as well. So we must always be assessing our own performance as well. And then again, linking these things that we see in the room to the real world. Evoking. So this is once you kind of identify where the opportunities are for growth, you're going to evoke the situations in the relationship with you where they can then try new things, have new behaviors. So you can describe what you're noticing, prompting clients to notice, request and invite, you make bold requests, expressing empathy and love all along the way. So here's some example questions you could ask to sort of achieve these ends in the therapy room. Like, what do you feel about me right now? What are you avoiding saying to me right now? I'm noticing a pattern. How can I help you open up to how much I value and appreciate you? I'm feeling afraid of making you angry right now. I wonder if you notice your tone. So again, you're inviting them to recognize the dynamic. All right, so this brings us to the part of most of us in this room are not therapists, and even the ones that are often not doing individual therapy, right? So how does this sort of apply to what we do? Essentially, this concept is at the heart of it is about creating relationships that exist with true intimacy, vulnerability, true connection, where we're showing awareness, courage, and love with the people in our lives to sort of improve our social connections. Once we build these skills and we build our relationships, that's going to improve mental health, that's going to improve life in general. So changing our relationships to sort of meet this pattern without having to actually do it in the therapy room is still going to improve their lives and improve our relationships too. The depth of our relationships with our clients will also be improved. And let's not forget, we are often the social connection for our clients, right? A lot of our clients, we're the ones that are going to have a deep connection with them or not have a deep connection with them. So it's not just training, it's the real life.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tyler, a psychologist with the New Lenox ICPN team. Here to talk to you all about ACT today. Matt just talked very wonderfully about FAP, which, as the theme continues to go, it's all about social connection, right? It's a very interpersonal therapy. ACT, on the other hand, is much more of an intrapersonal therapy, right? And that'll start to make more sense as we continue to go through here. But ACT takes the position that all people are hurting, all people are suffering, some just more than others. ACT takes the assumption of a destructive normality. So normal thinking and language processes are often destructful and increase or worsen unusual psychological dysfunction. In other words, everybody's going to experience pain. Pain is inevitable. Physical pain, psychological pain, discomfort, right? But the suffering is optional. And ACT's going to take that approach. Compare this with the idea of a healthy normality. Basically, the idea that the mainstream field of psychology takes is that we are born and we live in a natural state of psychological health, and things come along the way that take us off track. And what we need to do as clinicians to address that psychopathology is to get people back on track. I'm going to take kind of a step back and go back through some of what Matt had already touched on earlier to put this into the context of where ACT is in the field of behaviorism, because I know we have a lot of behavioral folks with us. Of course, we have the first wave of behaviorism, right? Our operant classical conditioning. Back in the 50s, 60s, we have Skinner, Watson, those guys. I was a little older, where the focus was on overt behavior change. What can I see, right? Stimulus, response. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, these are considered the black box, right? They're not really anything that a classical behaviorist is going to be interested in. Brings us to the second wave of behaviorism, started around the 70s with the Becks, right? It's still in use today, right? Most people here have probably heard, engaged with, had some type of experience with CBT in the past. right? CBT is a very mechanistic model. What that means is, sticking with that idea of disruptive normality or healthy normality, is it views the mind as a machine, right? You can think about it kind of like your car. If your car is broken, if the check engine light comes on, you go to the garage, they take out the broken part, they replace it with a new part, you're good to go, right? CBT is going to take that same general perspective. We identify maladaptive cognitions in the brain, beliefs about ourselves, about other people, the way things should be, and we restructure them through exercises. That I'm not going to get into, but that's sort of how CBT works. It treats the mind like it can just sort of be replaced. Parts of it can be replaced. This brings us to the third wave, right? Radical behaviorism, right? Radical, right? Everything we do, right? And as Matt already said, I know this is a little bit of circling back to that, but everything that we do is considered behavior by the radical behaviorists. Rather than focusing on restructuring and changing, what we're focusing on instead is accepting and being more mindful, being more present. And I'm going to unpack that a lot more as we get more into this. But as opposed to the mechanistic theories of CBT and other type of similar approaches, ACT is built on relational frame theory. And a full dive into what RFT is all about is beyond the scope of this presentation. But just a few brief points is that it's very big on language. Language is key to understanding how we get stuck in painful thoughts and feelings, right? Language allows us to create connections, associations between experiences, thoughts, feelings, right? And these relationships are bidirectional. What that means, we'll see what that means as we continue to go through this. But what language has allowed us to do has allowed us to become the dominant species on the planet through our ability to communicate, through our ability to solve problems, sometimes very complicated problems, but real world, concrete problems, right? The problem with problem solving, with our problem solving mind, is that our minds were evolved over time to solve problems. The function of our mind isn't to make us feel good, right? Our minds aren't designed to make us feel happy. It's to protect us from threats. It's to allow us to survive, to pass on our genes, right? That's what we're here for. So the same things that work well in the external world often create harm when we turn them towards the internal world, right? I want to, I just get a new house, there's peeling paint on the wall. So I can scrape off that paint, I can go to the store, pick up a new can of paint, and I can repaint that wall. Problem solved, right? Thank you, brain. Now, let's say I get held up at knife point on the way to the hardware store, and now I feel traumatized and I'm afraid to leave my house because I'm afraid that there's somebody outside with a knife waiting to attack me again. Can I just scrape that away? Right? Can I paint over that experience? I think most people here who have tried to get over something that's really challenging can probably connect with the fact that that's hard, right? So I'm going to ask everybody here to do something, okay? White bear. So for the next whatever amount of time, I'll tell you when we're done. What I want you to do, don't think about the white bear, okay? The next screen, it's going to be blank. When I say go, you're going to do whatever you want, however you want to do it. Do not think about a white bear. Ready? All right. Who here was successful? Put your hand up. Who was able to not think about a white bear completely? Right? That's surprising. There's always one. There's at least one person who's like, I wasn't able to, right? But the thing is, even if you were able to not think about a white bear at all, right? It took sustained effort, right? it's hard to do anything else if you're going around just trying not to think about a white bear. And you're probably going to notice after a certain period of time, the more energy and effort that you put into not thinking about the white bear, the more that white bear comes to the forefront of your mind, right? That's because our minds work by addition, not subtraction. Thanks, Stephen Hayes, the founder of ACT. The attempts to control internal experiences actually make these experiences more intense, more central, more salient, more influential, right? We try to escape a difficult emotion and it makes it worse. Like I said earlier about this bi-directional, we have extensive training in learning how to derive relationships between events, objects, and symbols. That's RFT, right? That's what ACT is built on, okay? But there's no unlearning, there's no rewriting. Once these connections are made and these relational frames are established, we can't just turn it off. Our thoughts come from our history and they stay with us, right? Everybody say it with me. Mary had a little, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody learned that. That's a relational frame in your brain. Red means, green means, yellow means, go faster, right? Go slow, stop, sorry. But we all have a general understanding of what yellow is supposed to mean, right? The idea here is that there's kind of like the dialectic that Matt had mentioned earlier, there's two sides to every one of these connections, right? So, you know, for example, when I say the word happy, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Okay. Sad. How about hot? Cold, right? Opposite sides. So we can sort of start to see how somebody who's trying to avoid or trying to enjoy happy feelings can easily be pulled into a negative emotion, right? So this brings us to ACT now. What are we accepting? What are we committing? What is ACT actually all about? It's about accepting the things that we can control, because clearly we can't control our thoughts and our feelings, right? As I've just sort of demonstrated, at least we can't control them nearly as much as we think we can, right? We have this illusion of control. So we're going to accept what we have personal control over in the service of committing to things that we really care about, committing to the things that improve our lives. And we do this so we can take action. As one of the titles of a famous ACT book says, get out of your mind and into your life. And ACT aims to maximize human potential for a rich, full, meaningful life. And we do this in three main ways. There's 6 main core components to ACT, but basically it can be boiled down to, we want to encourage people to be present through mindfulness exercises, through getting in contact with their present moment experience, and starting to separate themselves from their thoughts. And one of the ways we do that is by helping them to open up. We help them open up so that they are less attached to those feelings and thoughts, so that they can ultimately do what matters, do the things that they value, right? Make those committed actions, get into their life. So I'm going to ask the audience here, what are some of the interpersonal issues that some of the people that we support struggle with? You can just shout them out. You don't need to raise your hand. Anyone? Arguing. So arguing is actually more of an interpersonal issue. I'm thinking self-worth, right? Low self-worth, right? Depression, anxiety, anger, abandonment. What's one of the things that, how do people handle that? Just for example, think of somebody that you support. Sure, avoiding, right? Deflecting, denying, minimizing. There's so many ways, no right or wrong answers here. What ACT is going to do is it's going to encourage us to look at our thoughts from the perspective of workability. Workability is a very common ACT term rather than literal truth. What does workability mean? Workability means does this work for us? It's exactly what it sounds like. Does this behavior actually serve the purpose of helping me feel better? Can I have somebody from the audience volunteer for a second? I want to demonstrate something. Yes, you. This is a very famous ACT metaphor. So ACT is very big on metaphors, right? And that's really fortunate for a lot of the people that we support, because as you'll see as we continue to go through this, many of the ACT principles are very philosophically heavy, and metaphors make it a lot easier to understand and digest. So here's this one's called Tug of War with the Monster. I'm a big scary monster. Just pretend. I know I'm not. I represent all of the fears, all of the anxieties, all of the unhappiness that you have. And right here in front of us is a big bottomless pit with lava at the bottom. So if one of us falls down, we're done, right? We're finished. So you want to get rid of me. So you're going to try to pull me as much as you can into that hole, right? How long do you think you could do this? Right? Every time you pull, I'm pulling back, right? I'm that anxiety. I'm the anxiety monster, your fear, all those negative things, right? Eventually, it's going to get pretty tiring. You can't pull me down because I'm really strong. I'm really big. What else can you do?
Oh, let go.
Yeah. Drop the rope. Thank you. Give her a hand. Thanks, Ashley. Okay. What is that demonstrating? Well, the idea behind this metaphor, we might do this with a client in the room, is when we're trying, as some of you may have already guessed, you can see when you're pulling against that emotion, when you're fighting with that emotion, it's tiring and it's exhausting, and it takes up a lot of your energy and a lot of your just everything, right? Your energy. So can we let go of that struggle? Can we teach people how to give up that belief that they can control their emotions by pulling them around, by pushing them away, by holding on to them? This brings us to creative hopelessness, a fancy word for dropping the rope. I still remember having a very aversive reaction to the term creative hopelessness because it doesn't sound very hopeful, does it? It's a behavioral posture that occurs when all of the behavior that's oriented towards an outcome, let's say that, and that outcome is often typically immediate control of our feelings, of our emotions, of our experience, it's deemed as unworkable, as ineffective, right? The thing that I've been trying to do throughout my whole life has not been working. We need to undermine this change agenda, or I like to call the control agenda. Because paradoxically, the more we try to control a situation, the less control we ultimately have. The more we try to control what we're feeling and what we're thinking, the less control over it that we actually have. It's not the same as despair. When we say hopelessness, we don't mean that it's just that we need to just sink in despair and feel depressed because we have no control over anything. So what's the point of living at all, right? That's not what we're saying when we say creative hopelessness. It's about giving up the fight, right? Not doing the same thing that hasn't been working. And this is creative because it allows new things to emerge. It allows us to learn new skills. So now let's get into psychopathology from an ACT perspective. 6 main concepts of ACT. The 2 that are really the cornerstones of where suffering comes from. Because remember, like I said, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. This is how we suffer. One of the first ways we suffer is cognitive fusion. I think about it like a welder there. So the metaphor for that is, when a welder is putting 2 pieces of metal together, they're using heat and they are fusing them together so they become one. We do the same thing with our thoughts, with our emotions, our beliefs, right? We get stuck to them. We get caught up in them and we allow them to dominate our behavior. We experience these thoughts as facts or as a literal truth. So, I suck, I'm bad. That's the thought, right? When I'm fused to that thought is all that I can see. I'm looking at that thought as if it is 100% true. That's what I mean when I say literal truth. When I say, I suck, I'm a failure, I believe that to be a literal truth and not just an experience that my mind is having, right? Something that my mind is telling me. There's all kinds of examples of fusion, right? Feel rules that we have, reasons, judgments, things that we say about ourselves. I wish things were like they used to be. Right? So what does the ACT therapist do to the client that's fused? We defuse, right? We let go, we teach people how to let go of those thoughts, those feelings, separating or distancing from our thoughts and letting them come and go without getting caught up in them, right? We want to be able to, in a sense, step back from that thought so that I can look at that thought rather than looking out from that thought. Not getting caught up in them, letting them come and go. Understanding that that no thoughts are permanent or last forever, but they also don't go anywhere, right? Learning, ACT is all about learning how to step back and observe our experiences. The goal is to see the true nature of thoughts, right? They're nothing more than words and pictures. They're experiences that we're having. We're an observing entity that is experiencing these things. And we want to encourage people to understand workability, right? Not whether or not a thought is true or false, but whether or not it serves us in meeting our goals, our values, right? So how do we do that? There are countless examples of different ways that we can engage in diffusion. One of my favorites, one of the more basic ones. Somebody give me a negative thought. I'm fat. Good. I am fat. I might ask a client to then say, okay, so I'm having the thought that I'm fat. And to say those two side by side. Because when you say I am fat, that's a fact. I am fat. I look in the mirror and I say that. When I can help somebody reposition themselves into being able to say, I'm having the thought, I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm fat, right? It doesn't make that thought go away. It might not even make it stop hurting right away. But what it does is it starts to position you in a way where you can observe that thought as simply something that through culture, through your own experiences, through your upbringing, wherever it came from, that's all kind of irrelevant. It's a thought that you're having, it's in your head, but it's not you, right? It might be true, it might not be true, but is that going to help you live the life that you value, right? There's lots of other ways we can do this. We can say, I'm fat in a silly voice. We can say, I'm fat. We can sing it. I'm fat, slowly, right? Repeated quickly over and over again. I'm fat, I'm fat, I'm fat. They're very silly, and a lot of ACT has a lot of fun, silly exercises, but that's kind of the point, right? We want to take it less seriously, and we want to be able to let go of it, because fusion is all about holding on to things, right? Form and location, and noticing and problem solving. What a lot of these really have in common is about, take for instance, form and location. If we can take a thought and we can imagine that thought as a physical entity, we can visualize it, give it a shape, give it a weight, give it a color. What that does is it takes that thought and it moves it outside of yourself a little bit, right? We're projecting it out so that it's slightly separate from us. That's the goal of all of these techniques, right? There's often imagining your thoughts on a computer screen. Naming the story. It's one of my favorites, right? Like most people, I experience imposter syndrome from time to time. So maybe where you believe that you don't truly deserve to be in the position where you're at. You're not qualified enough. I'm never, this is terrible. I don't know anything. Well, there goes that's the imposter story again. There goes the imposter story, right? The observer self we'll get into when we talk more about self as context. And a lot of these different components of ACT are very overlapping, so as you're going to see. But well, this will bring us to, this will bring us to the second one. I'm going to let everyone read over those, but next we have experiential avoidance, right? So fusion is when I am attached to this thought, to this feeling. Experiential avoidance is the flip side of that, right? It's exactly what it sounds like. I am so not okay with this that I'm going to do everything that I can to run away from it, right? I attempt to avoid, suppress, or otherwise alter the form of the thought, right? Remember the tug of war. That's experiential avoidance. I'm trying to pull that thought into the hole. I'm trying to get rid of it, right? Our clients do this all the time. We do this all the time. A client yelled at me after I asked him about the truthfulness of a statement that he made. He doesn't want to confront the fact that he lied. So he engages in verbal aggression instead, because now that's what I'm going to be focusing on, right? That's experiential avoidance. Property destruction, flipping over tables and chairs, demanding to go to the hospital, because the hospital is a very reinforcing place, right? They're going to make me feel better. They're going to be nice to me. I'm going to get out of this situation that I'm in. Physical aggression, right? Becoming aggressive when people attempt to move somebody's stuff or ask you to do something, right? All of the behavior analysts here know this is very classic, just escape avoidance behavior. ACT calls this experiential avoidance because it views our thoughts, feelings, all that stuff as behavior. What's the flip side of that? How do we tackle that? What does the ACT therapist do? ACT therapist is going to, through various exercises, promote acceptance. Acceptance and willingness, right? This means allowing our thoughts and feelings to be as they are, regardless of whether they are pleasant or painful. It sounds very straightforward, but it is extremely difficult in practice. Opening up and making room for them, turning towards them, making room for them, experiencing them, dropping the struggle, dropping the rope, letting them come and go as they naturally do. Understanding, like I said earlier, that nothing lasts forever and everything's going to come back around. We need to allow ourselves to have these painful emotions when doing so enables us to act on our values. We're not just doing it just for the sake of doing it. We're doing it for the sake of getting more connected with the people around us in our world and living out our values. By making full, open, undefended psychological contact with these experiences, truly experiencing them without trying to push them away. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. For example, I might ask somebody to lay a hand on their body and ask them where they feel this most intently, right? Imagine this as a healing hand, focusing attention on it. Normalizing, softening around it, right? ACT relies a lot on meditation, and that's going to be the next thing that I get into. But through meditation, we're building awareness skills, because so much of the time when we are trying to avoid something, or we are fused to something, it completely blocks out, it puts blinders on us, right? So the goal with acceptance techniques is to drop those blinders and to let people experience more about what's going on around them, right? And can we soften up around the feeling? Can we turn towards it? Can we make room for it, right? Looking at a feeling or a thought, like I'm a curious scientist, for instance, right? Observing it, studying it. What does it feel like? Where do I notice it? See if you can open up and expand that feeling. Physicalizing that feeling, right? There's a lot of overlap here with how we might tackle fusion. And sometimes it can be difficult to tell whether what a client is experiencing is truly fusion or whether it's actually avoidance, because sometimes it can be both. We do what works. Workability. So contact with the present moment is basically an operational definition of what mindfulness is. We are bringing ourselves into contact with what's going on right here. Being in the here and now, fully conscious of our experience instead of being lost in our thoughts. Flexibility is big. The core of ACT, the goal of ACT, what ACT would say true psychological health and well-being is psychological flexibility. The ability to do the workable thing, the thing that is effective, rather than something we feel compelled to do. We want to enhance our conscious awareness of our experience in the present moment so we can perceive accurately what's happening and gather important information about whether to change, persist in behavior, or engage fully in whatever we're doing with increased effectiveness, right? So again, it's all about awareness. It's about broadening our awareness, giving us more choices, more options, noticing what's happening in the here and now, right? Because as I've told many clients before, I would much rather see somebody engage in an unskillful action because it's their choice to do so, rather than because they felt like they had no other option, right? So we're going to discriminate between noticing and thinking and pay flexible attention, right? What are some really concrete ways that we can do this, right? Start by just taking 10 deep breaths. Notice the sensation of the air coming in and out of your mouth, your chest rising and falling, right? Dropping the anchor is somewhat pretty common guided meditation technique where we're focusing on grounding our feet into the floor, dropping our awareness into our body. Noticing 5 things is a really common, simple grounding technique. Using your 5 senses. Tell me one thing you can hear, one thing you can see, smell, taste, feel, right? Even if it's just in little ways, we're showing people that they can gain more control, not by trying to avoid completely, but by trying to ground themselves and pull themselves far enough away from that emotion so that they can look at it rather than from it. We can practice mindfulness anywhere. You can practice mindfulness brushing your teeth. You can notice the feeling of the bristles on your gums, on your teeth. You can notice mindfulness in the chores as you feel the fabrics of the clothes as you're folding them, right? In pleasant activities. You're doing mindfulness if you are focusing 100% on what you're doing. Mindfulness is not just about sitting on a cushion with incense burning and just, trying to be super zen. It can be that, right? But more concretely, in a way that our clients are going to accept and actually practice, is we encourage them to be 100% present where they're at. This is where it's going to start to get a little bit philosophical, but it's also a big part of ACT, right? So we've got diffusion, we've got acceptance. Now we're going to get to the concept that self is context. Self as content is often called the conceptualized self, right? The content of our thoughts. My beliefs, thoughts, feelings, all the stuff about who am I, the way that I describe myself, the way that I view myself. I'm an independent person, or I'm unlovable, or I'm very lovable, or I'm popular, or I don't know. Everybody has ways that they describe themselves. Fusion can creep up into here as well, because when we have these views of ourselves, this conceptualization of who we are as a person, we can become fused to that. When we become overly fused to that, again, remember, it's all about flexibility, because to a certain extent, that's what makes us us, right? We're connected to that. When we become overly fused to that, we become overly inflexible and we identify with that. It leads to a self as a description or a self as content. I am these things. And what that does is it narrows your worldview very much. So if I have the belief that I'm independent, and I'm fused with that belief, it's going to make it really hard for me to ask for help when I need help, when it's appropriate to ask for help. If I truly believe that I'm unlovable, I'm never going to try to connect with other people because I'm just going to assume that nobody cares about me. So what do we do instead? The goal of self is context. And this is where it can get a little bit confusing, but basically what it means is it's not a thought or a feeling, but a viewpoint from which we can observe our thoughts and feelings. So think diffusion, right? When we're talking about diffusion, I'm here, I'm fused to my thought, I get a little bit of diffusion from it, right? But who's looking at that thought, right? Because this thought is something that my mind is generating, but there's still a person looking at it, and that's me. That's the I. This is a lot harder to kind of connect with clients, I think, and to understand, but it's the part of us that's noticing that we're noticing. It's becoming conscious of our own consciousness, in a sense. It's the place from which we observe, this transcendent sense of self that's able to respond to thoughts and feelings and provide a safe and constant viewpoint from which to observe them. This is interwoven throughout a lot of the ACT components that we talk about, but there are really concrete ways that we can actually do this, right? Simple tacting, or tacting being just a fancy word for label, right? Labeling how we're feeling. We encourage that with the people that you support. You know, when they tell you, you ask them how they're feeling, and they say, I feel happy, or that makes me angry. But take it a step further, right? You feel angry. So you notice that you're feeling angry. Your mind is telling you that you're feeling angry, right? The situation is making you feel angry. Like, we want to be able to help train people to take perspective, simply observing their experiences without putting a label on it, without putting a judgment on it, right? Without saying, that was a good experience to have, or I shouldn't feel this way about this particular experience, right? Another great way that we can do this for our clients is the people we support is through modeling, right? I get hurt. I hurt like you, and sometimes I have a really hard time stepping back from that hurt and really looking at it. But that hurt is there, but it's not, and sometimes I struggle to not just see it as a part of me, right? It seems very simple, but just simply starting to model, starting to create that culture in which people can understand that we're not our thoughts, right? We're not our experiences. They are a part of us, but they also don't define us. A good metaphor for this, is the chessboard metaphor. So a lot of times, when you think about a game of chess, you imagine the pieces on top as kind of like our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences. We're checkmating, we're taking pieces off the board, getting rid of a pawn here or a knight there, right? That's sort of the struggle. That represents the struggle, in a sense, that we're a part of. So how do we step out of that struggle? The goal is to stop identifying ourselves as the chess pieces, and instead to identify with the board itself. Because the board itself doesn't change. The board itself does not have any stake in this game. It simply is there. It's the vessel on which this fight with thoughts, feelings, emotions takes place. But the board doesn't really care who wins or loses. It's just simply there observing everything happen, right? Observer exercise would simply ask somebody, notice X, right? Notice X emotion, right? The fact that you're noticing X means that you're not X, right? Simple observer exercise. Okay, so we've talked about diffusion, talked about acceptance, self as context. Another component is we have values. Remember, ACT is not just about disconnecting or defusing from certain thoughts and feelings or turning towards things for nothing, right? It's for the goal of connecting more with our values and doing things that are important to us. Values are statements about what we want to be doing with their life, about what we want to stand for, and how we want to behave on an ongoing basis. So the goal of an ACT therapist is to clarify what gives our life a sense of meaning or purpose, to use our values as an ongoing guide for action. We're going to distinguish values from goals and help clients connect with and clarify their values so that they can use them to inspire, motivate, and guide ongoing action, right? So I think most people in this field we're focused on goals, right? We want to help people reach their goals. We need measurable, concrete things that we can help people. You check off that box, put it in your personal plan, your behavior plan, right? What are our goals? Values are more like ongoing action, right? We're never really truly reaching, there's no endpoint in our value, right? I could value myself. I could say that I value being a good friend, right? And then I do something nice for my friend and I'm just like, okay, well, cross that value off the list. I'm done being a friend now, right? That's not how values work. That's a good goal, not a great value. I think of values like a GPS. Values are the direction that you're going. You're headed northbound, right? You could head that way indefinitely. But the stops along the way, the towns along the way are sort of like your goals. We're moving in a particular direction, right? I'm moving towards developing better relationships are, let's say, are my value. Developing assertiveness skills along the way, right? Learning how to listen instead of just talk. These are goals that I have along the way on my value of better relationships. The challenge with values and the people that we serve, and I would say really this can extend to anyone, is that if you think of most of the people that you support, you ask them what their goals are and what are they going to tell you? What's a common? Yeah. Live in the community, get a job, right? Live with my family, okay? A lot of those values, because we hear a lot of the same values, a lot of those come from the context that the person is coming from, right? So they are living in this environment where they're told that they have that the path to success, the ultimate goal that you should have in life is have your own place, have a family, have a job independently in the community, right? That's the thing to do, capital T thing to do, right? But it's difficult to know sometimes whether what people say they want is what they truly want, right? We call that pliance. It's a fancy word for it, but basically, my point here is that we really need to make sure that we're helping get clients in touch with their true values and that we are really intentional when we think about what our values are, right? I might say that I value physical fitness because I just believe that it should be because I just have the belief that it's a good thing. But if I'm not actually motivated and I don't actually enjoy it and it doesn't bring me anything, is that really my value or is that society's value, right? That I'm internalizing. So how do we help people get in touch with their values? We have to step outside of our comfort zone, right? We have to expand experiences. Their experiences, our experiences, everybody's experience. If I've been going to the same day program for 10 years and I do the same thing every day, and I go to the same restaurant every week, every Friday, chances are I'm never going to experience or connect with a lot of values that I typically would. Think of a story of a man who we would take out to a nice restaurant and he would always order a hamburger because that was just the only thing that he wanted, or so we thought. Although it turned out later that it wasn't necessarily that's all that he wanted. It was that he'd only been to McDonald's and for any other time that he's gone out, and he only knows how to order a hamburger. He's never had that experience. He's never been pushed outside of that place of comfort, right? So it would challenge you all to think about that when you're setting goals with your clients, when you're helping people clarify and identify their values. This brings us towards the end as we talk about committed action, the last crucial step in the ACT puzzle. Committed action means taking larger patterns of effective action guided and motivated by our values. That's a fancy way of saying just do it. But essentially it is. I struggle sometimes with how to define committed action, because committed action, it's making the choice. It's the willingness to do the thing that is hard in the service of your values. And it means being flexible. It means you have to be able to adapt to the challenges of the situation and either persist with changing behavior as required, persist with or change behavior as required, doing what it takes, right? We want to translate values into ongoing evolving patterns of action and to establish the pattern of repeatedly returning to our values no matter how many times we lose touch with them. And a very common ACT strategy is using a lot of, we'll use a lot of worksheets, and there's a very common one called the ACT bullseye. And we'll ask people to identify, kind of on a scale, how close they are to certain value areas in their life. And we might do that every session. We might do that when we notice that somebody's getting disconnected with their values, because your values are ultimately what drives all of your decisions in the ACT model. We're going to use values to set goals, break those goals down into specific action, right? And we're going to identify barriers and overcome them using the other 5 core ACT processes, right? Diffusion, acceptance, contact with the present moment, self as context, values. When we're taking committed action, it's not always fun. This overlaps pretty strongly with what the CBT therapist would call behavior activation. Whether it's fun or not, you do the thing that's hard. But we need to help clients formulate goals that are consistent with their values. And we're often going to need to create smaller goals and milestones along the way. Like I said earlier, I value relationships. So things along the way would be developing my assertiveness skills so that I can express my wants and needs, even though I may have the fear or the thought that if I express myself and what I truly need, this person will reject me. This person will leave me, right? Brings it back to courage, like Matt was talking about earlier. Can you be courageous enough to commit yourself to that action, to do the thing that's truly in the service of your values? And it may take a long time, right? This is often the hardest part of acceptance and commitment therapy, past just understanding the model itself. It's putting one foot forward, starting the path. But we also have to manage our expectations and reinforce small steps, as anybody in this field is aware. Committed action is not something that happens overnight. So that kind of brings me towards the end of what I was talking about with ACT, but I do want to call your attention to a few points here. Further reading, further things to look into, right? The Association for Contextual and Behavior Sciences is a great website. It has a lot of resources for ACT, for FAB too, I believe. And it's very inexpensive to join. They have a lot of great and free resources. ACT Made Simple, an easy to read book on acceptance and commitment therapy. I highly recommend for anybody who's, not a a trained therapist, but just wants to understand ACT a little bit more, it's a great self-help book. And then, of course, we also have the original ACT book, which is a little bit more technical. But yeah, that's ACT in a nutshell. So thank you, everyone. Oh. Did better.
Is my mic working? Yeah, okay. Thank you guys so much. That was great.
Thanks.
Have a seat. We have a few comments from the people on Zoom, so we'll get those, and then I know Anna has a few questions from the audience. And so one sort of comment that was familiar over and over again is last week with Jason Buckles, we talked about how it's difficult for us to sort of normalize challenging behavior with individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like both of you touched on that a little bit. Tyler, you gave the example of, why is it so easy for us to acknowledge like our fridge is broken or our car is broken, but yet it's so hard to sort of fix our mind in those situations, particularly with, bringing it full circle with some of the individuals that we serve. It's hard for people to get behind the idea that there's an actual issue there that needs to be fixed. What are some of the pointers or tips that you could give people to sort of get people to embrace the idea that, it's worth fixing?
Yes, absolutely. I think just like I had said during my presentation, our problem-solving mind is very well adjusted for solving all of those real-world problems, like a broken refrigerator, for instance. But also, a reaction that I had to one of the things that you said is that, it's not just our clients that have challenging behaviors. It's our clients that have maybe the biggest or the most noticeable challenging behavior,
Sure.
But we all can connect on some level or another with this struggle with thoughts about ourselves, about other people. And can we recognize that, and can we soften around that a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Can we recognize that it's something that we all struggle with? But we as, let's say, neurotypical adults may have the ability to mask that and to move on. But the
Sure.
people that we support are going through the same things we are. ACT, Stephen Hayes is very big on the idea that we're all in the soup together, right? We're all experiencing the same feelings, but some of us just more than others.
Mm-hmm.
So in just remembering that context, putting it into
Sure.
into the context of recognizing that it's completely normal. We all experience this.
Mm-hmm. And I sort of related it to, and I know Matt and I have had conversations about this, and some of the folks in the audience too. We do a lot of staff training for DSPs on power struggles, right? And so I think your example of just letting go is pretty powerful. I think that's one of the things that we sort of say when we're training DSPs, right? You don't have to engage in that. You have the opportunity to sort of just let go in those moments.
I like to say support, not control, right?
Yeah.
The more that we try to control, and the same thing, absolutely the same principle that applies to trying to control our thoughts and our feelings can be applied to trying to control other people, right? The more that we try to control another person's behavior or anything, paradoxically, we're going to have less control because they're going to push away, they're going to fight, it's going to cause conflict, right? So how can we drop the rope of that attempt to control people?
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I kind of tie it back to the idea from dialectical behavioral therapy, which is also related to FAP. And the idea that we have to be able to see that our clients are doing the best they can in the moment, and there's changes that can be made,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need to be able to validate first before we can sort of even get in there. And we do that through showing them, again, like the unconditional positive regard, the love that I see that you're trying, and I see that this behavior made sense in some context before, and then helping them see how doing things a little bit differently might improve their life overall, right?
Sure.
And then recognizing when they make those attempts, even if they're imperfect attempts, and sort of recognizing the courage it takes, and yeah.
I think that some people out there in Zoom land would challenge us in saying that that's maybe above the skills that we sort of teach our entry level DSPs, right? That it's hard to sort of get them to buy into that idea and validate those feelings on an everyday sort of basis with some of the things we're seeing. They're wearing so many hats in the environment that, you know, I know when we go in as sort of the crisis team, we're seeing that they're not responding at the very first sort of opportunity, right? That there's a lot of missed opportunities to validate and have acceptance and not engage in those power struggles. And so, you know, those people that would sort of say, we don't have staff that can do that, what would your guys' response be to that?
Sure. Yeah. And again, like we presented on some pretty high level sort of therapy ideas today, but I think, especially with FAP, I think a lot of it is just shifting the mindset just slightly in that direction of being more sort of accepting and validating. I was a DSP for a long time. I've taken the hits. I recognize how hard it is in those moments to recognize these things. But I think, you know, if we could just move slightly in that direction, again, that's our, I talked about T1s and T2s, right? We're just trying to get incrementally better ourselves at doing these things. We're not perfect. We're all growing and learning. It's like he said, we're all in the same soup. So none of us are going to jump right in and be perfect at any things any more than our clients are going to be.
Sure.
Yeah, well said. And I would add to that too. I mean, I have been in the role of DSP. I am a safety care trainer and user of safety care. I mean, so I've definitely taken my hits too. And I would say, for one, validation is beneficial for any. I mean, if you ever worked with me on the crisis team, you've probably gotten my validation training or our validation training at one point or another. But it is because it's so very important to validate people where they're at. Yeah, but also I think it's helpful to recognize that these strategies, while some of them are kind of, you know, high level, very heady concepts, the core components that are most important are that when we, at least with ACT, is this control agenda, right? You can make your job harder on yourself or you can make it easier on yourself. And understanding that when you try to use coercive control to get somebody to do something, you're ultimately taking away power from yourself, right? You're getting yourself more stuck, more fused, if you will, to a situation. So, you know, how can you step back? How can you offer somebody more time? How can you say, let me come back and try that again later? You know, there's countless ways that you can step away from that struggle, but how can you step away from this control agenda?
Yeah. What questions did you have, Anna? I don't want to take up.
Well, and I think to add upon that is I was thinking as you're talking about control, you know, as a society, we're kind of taught that control is good. It offers ourselves some predictability and some structure in our lives. But then at the same time, when you were talking, Tyler, I thought, you know, you are closing yourself off to different ways of doing things. And we keep doing what we know how to do, but that doesn't mean it's the right way or the best way or anything like that. So we need to really challenge ourselves into thinking like to let go of that control and put our guard down so that we can learn different ways of dealing with things. Also, when you're talking about the how can we take this and utilize it in our CILAs or our residential places or anything like that, I was thinking, you know, starting with values is a great place too. You know, have we sat down and identified what our individuals that we serve values are? I know that there's kind of like little individual cultures that happened at your CILAs. Like, have you guys created like a value-based life? Have you asked your people you serve and your staff, what are our values? And then what can we do to align with those values? I know in Rockford, Amy does a really good job of identifying, working with all of our clinicians. What are your guys' values? Is it flexibility? Is it, passion? What is it? And then what can we do to meet some of those values? So I think taking things like that and concretely using them across our settings is kind of a good place to start as well. A question that we had was for children with autism that may have a difficult with abstract concept, is ACT appropriate? Is it best utilized for people who have verbal and language skills?
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. Would I say that the way that I've like to think about ACT is it's an extremely useful tool for conceptualizing, or we could just say understanding how somebody is stuck in a certain way, right? We can identify fusion. It's pretty easy to tell when somebody is fused to a thought or a feeling, or when they're trying to escape or avoid a thought. That's usually pretty intuitive. Now, self as context, understanding that I am a vessel upon which all of these thoughts and feelings come and go, that's very complex for most people to understand. And I wouldn't necessarily start with something like that. Now, there are a lot of the strategies that I had talked about before, like mindfulness exercises, grounding exercises, constantly helping people to turn towards things that are challenging rather than reinforcing their escape from it is something that we can do with anybody, right? So yes and no, I would say, is the answer to your question. Yes and no.
This field, there's always a yes and no, right? Do you guys have questions out here?
Tyler, that was one of my questions. Many people say that ACT is not effective, but have you identified over time any accommodations in terms of how to make it most effective? I have found that it's a fantastic tool in helping people really think through those folks we're serving that are kind of lost in life, that have these great skill sets, but they just can't. They're so in their moment, they can't figure out where they want to be.
Right.
I have found ACT to be very, very effective in that.
Yes, and it's really about the language we use too. I mean, what I try to explain to a client who might have autism, that fusion is happening, maybe, but I might use different language, like you're stuck, like being stuck to thoughts, using a lot of metaphors. Metaphors are really big in ACT, as you know, right? Like imagine it like two pieces of Velcro being stuck together and this thought is attached to you. How can we pull that away and give you some more space from that thought?
I'll do another quick ACT question. Have you found any exercises that you would say were really effective at helping people identify that contrast between this is what I value, whether it's getting a job or having a girlfriend or whatever it is, and here's how I spend my time, and how are those two related together?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think about a young man, that I worked with in a day program setting, and it comes back to that idea of the conceptualized self, this belief that this is how I am, this is what I do. And when you get like that, it closes you off to all of these other experiences. So, he would say that this is what I do. And it really, like I said, closed off the experiences. So we were really pushing him to do new things, right? Like I said, expanding that experience. When you really push people outside of their comfort zone to do new things, that's sort of where the rubber meets the road, in a sense. Now, I know what you were asking is more, how do we help people when they say, these are my values, but then they show up and they're not actually living out those values? I guess the answer to that would be that the first thing that I would think is, let's revisit our values, right? Because is this truly a value? Is this truly something that you value? Or is this something that you've been told by your parents that you need to value when you grow up?
You think
right?
I think you should,
Right. I want a job in the community. And then as soon as they get to the community, they fail spectacularly because they're not invested in it. They don't want to do the work. They are socially anxious. They're not ready for it, right? And maybe that is a value. Maybe we started too soon and we pushed them into that too soon. Or maybe that's just not something they value.
Would you agree that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that we sort of push our values on our population and the individuals we
Absolutely.
serve? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's sort of one of the main issues with our, I don't want to say our whole system because we got a lot of issues, but is that we sort of tell people what they should be thinking and doing.
Well, it's part of our culture as well. I think last week, my boss, Kim Shantz, you all know Kim Shantz? She was, yeah. No.
She's not here though.
That's right. No, but it reminds me of a conversation that we were having. I just don't want to take credit for what she said because it was, we talk about getting people into the community, right? Pushing people out into our, the capital T, the community that we all live in. But having a developmental disability, living in a SILA, going to a day program, that is also in itself a community, right? It's a community that people are comfortable with, that they know how to navigate, that they grow up in. So we're constantly trying to push people out into our mainstream community. And that might not be what they value. They might internalize that and say that that's what they value because they want to be independent, but that's not true for everybody. We have to understand where the context that people's values are coming from as well.
And now my questions are for Matt, but along those same lines, I think, we talk about person-centered planning and all that stuff, and we pretend we are, but as long as I'm shoving my goals down your throat, right? Being person-centered is respecting decisions you don't agree with, right? And so it goes along those same lines, right? Whose goals are we working from? But anyway, so mine for you are for more for the therapist, actually. I wonder if you have any suggestions for people when they're doing FAP to make sure we're recognizing as those CRB2s emerge so that we're sure we're shaping and not waiting until they emerge fully formed, right?
Right.
And so I just wondered if you had any suggestions in terms of strategies to remain aware, to make sure, you said at the very beginning, anything that's not a CRB1.
Right.
Which is really important in terms
Yeah.
of shaping, more and more successful behavior, but it's easy to overlook.
No, absolutely. And that's like one of the foundational, right? Awareness is one of the foundational parts of the therapy.
Right.
And it's very difficult. Because it's not even just about seeing the new behavior. It's also about like having the sort of willingness, encourage yourself to sort of jump in and recognize it. But you're right. Like you always want the best, all the BCBAs in here know the best reinforcement is immediate, right? So you want to jump in and talk about the thing happening right now with you in the therapy moment. That's going to be way more effective than talking about the thing that happened last week at the outing or in the van, right? So helping them recognize this thing just happened between us. And maybe I wonder how that was related to that other thing that may have happened, and how you sort of changed your way of dealing with me might also benefit you in this other sort of situation. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. And then the other one was around evoking CRBs. So, one of the criticisms that, of course, is stated about FAP is, aren't there ethical issues around your evoking behavior that could potentially have negative consequences for people? So I just wondered how you address those ethical concerns that people express. And then the secondary one, and then I'll stop talking, is suggestions that you have for therapists. Again, you said it. Sometimes you avoid evoking because you just don't want to deal with the consequences for you.
Right.
So strategies to help the therapist be mindful of that and be vulnerable. Because that vulnerable one, I know, especially for behaviorally trained people, they're taught to keep everything rigid, and so it's challenging as a therapist to be vulnerable. So.
Right. Yeah, I think you pointed out a really important point there of in the moment, sort of being able to decipher what is yours and what is mine, right? When am I just afraid of a potential reaction or an unknown reaction versus when would it be unethical to push you maybe too far to a point that you're not ready for yet. Like we're always doing that delicate dance. And that, I mean, that comes from knowing your client, from knowing yourself, from, again, constantly assessing, and you're going to get it wrong sometimes, right? That becomes your new T1, T2 behavior sequence, right? Maybe this week you didn't get that right. You pushed them too far with the best of intention. Next time you'll know to maybe take the throttle off a little bit. Or maybe next week, you've got to push a little harder. They're able to sort of accept that feedback from you because you have the relationship that's sort of founded on this sort of respect and sort of loving relationship that you can push them a little farther than maybe you think you can. So yeah, there's no perfect answer to that. I would say you're always doing the best you can and trying to operate from the perspective of what's best, for them, and assessing yourself constantly.
Sure.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit? Because and absolutely, I agree with everything you said. But when we say evoking CRBs, we're not necessarily wanting to put ourselves in a position where we're trying to upset people, right? The goal isn't necessarily like I want to upset my client. And a lot of like you said, it comes from knowing your client, knowing yourself, and a lot of that comes from education and supervision and getting that feedback and learning that clinical intuition. But how can most people do that is, when you notice, it's that awareness. It all comes back to awareness, noticing that in yourself when you're starting to put up those walls, when your anxiety is starting to come up. We're using that as a tool. FAP is all about the therapists themselves as a tool in the room, right? You're kind of the one who's helping the client try out things, or you're giving the feedback that you wish that the person in their life would have been better able to give them,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well said.
One of the comments that evoked a lot of comments during your presentation, Matt, was the idea of connections being a meaningful thing for people. And so there was a lot of comments about people need people and, what does that mean for our population? And I think Tyler hit on it a little bit with one of the things that Kim said, is that maybe that means different things for different people. And it's not always what we think. But what are sort of your thoughts about that?
Yeah. No, I kind of think like what you guys were sort of talking about before. There was this sort of noble overcorrection from our clients being strictly isolated into unnatural communities, institutional settings and whatnot. And the overcorrection has been, well, the community is the outside world, is the community. What we're doing here is something else. But I think you guys both touched on this, and Dr. Buckles last week touched a lot on this, that our community here is also a community, right?
Sure.
And we are the social connection for a lot of our clients. And that's okay. That's not, does that replace community integration? For a lot of the clients, no. But for some of them, we probably are going to be the most solid connection in their life, right? They're not going to get that job necessarily, but there's a chance for them to feel connected and socially well here. Like we can help create that for them too. That would be my take on that.
Yeah. Another comment that's it just sort of an idea that was funny, and it sort of came full circle when Tyler was speaking, is that somebody commented that they were awake at 2 a.m. trying to think about not thinking so they could go back to sleep. And so that
We've all
kind
been
of resonated with me. And then, when Tyler encouraged us not to think about the bear, that was the only thing we thought about, right? So 2 o'clock turns into 3 o'clock, which turns into 4 o'clock. And next thing we know, we're up. Anna, did you have any other?
No, I just think as we wrap up here, we have so many different disciplines and backgrounds and things here in Zoomland. And just here, we have a psychologist, we have a BCBA, we have a therapist, I'm a social worker. So just real quick, both of you, what's your one big takeaway that you want us to get from your guys' sessions today? Way to put you on the spot.
Be real and connect.
Be real and connect. That's good. You can't use that one.
It's better to support and not control.
Yeah, I like that. Well, thank you both so much. This was great. Tons of positive feedbacks. on both the presentations. I know people enjoyed, how they can sort of take little snippets of it and apply it to what we do day in and day out. If you have not signed up for our 4th session, you can do that. Do you have any other housekeeping?
And again, just give us a couple weeks to get continuing education out. And thank you guys. Thank all 3 of you very much.
Thank you.